Fantastic. How you doing, Brian?
I'm in a great mood.
Hey, that's good. You got a lot of good reasons to be in a great mood with everything going the way it's going today. I gotta say, very happy to be here actually talking with you.
Yeah, well, my question is like, what's it been like on this journey in Wasteland? You come from a long history of game development. You were one of like the original game developers in the trenches, you know, where it was the Wild West, where everything was proprietary. Now you've got to this point where not only can you crowdfund games, but you can also just kind of bring them back to life, and you have all these more tools and things that you didn't have access to. What's it like seeing this journey of Wasteland go from this 2D pixel RPG into this fully 3D reactiveness open world journey?
Boy, I could answer that any number of different ways. You know, I've been watching the High Score documentary on Netflix. I don't know if you guys have seen that, but it takes me back to the era when, you know, as to your point, that things were super pixelated, super crude. The original Wasteland, you know, we only had 140K on a floppy disk. So I think the icon for Wasteland 3 is about the same size as the game in terms of storage space these days. So yeah, and to your point, we didn't have tools. So the first Wasteland took like 4 years to make, which was quite long at the time. Games didn't typically take that long because we had to program each square that they stepped on in order to have reactivity. And then we ran out of disk space. That's why we did the paragraph book system, was because we just couldn't get more text in the game, even though we wanted to. We had all these writers, but we just couldn't get it across. So yeah, it's been an incredible journey. So you think about that, and then, you know, most people know the story that I couldn't get the rights to Wasteland back, and that's why Fallout was born, and that was in the 90s. And so, you know, I got to work on the Fallout series, and then I left Interplay, and then I didn't have a Fallout or a Wasteland. And then I was fortunate enough to I was waiting in the wings for the trademark to expire, and I grabbed it. And then I went out and pitched it, and I couldn't get any traction at all. And then I went to our core audience with Kickstarter, and it was really that was the Hail Mary pass for the series. That was like, if that wasn't going to get funded by the audience, that would have been it, because I'd already pitched it. So now to have it fail on a Kickstarter would have just been, see, this is why we thought it was a terrible idea. And so that was just a wonderful moment when it got funded. But yeah, I just, from the very beginning, and I'm not, that said, I still am in the trenches all the time with the product, and I love it. And I'm super focused on the user experience is where I spend a lot of my time. But yeah, things have come along a long ways since then. Especially from an audio perspective. I think back then there was no music right in the game. There was no spoken dialogue. You know, this game has almost 600 speaking parts and 40 hours of dialogue. And then, you know, there's all the music from Mark Morgan that he did to create the atmosphere. And then we had all the original songs that we worked with Mary Ramos, who does the Tarantino films, to give it another unique soundtrack aspect.
So obviously, one of the things that the Wasteland series always kind of been heralded for is kind of its dark humor, and just kind of its no cares given approach to things. And so I wanted to kind of ask, like, you know, with the dialogue and the characters, like, you kind of push a lot of lines, and I guess what some might consider political correctness, especially, you know, here in 2020. Were there ever any times that you guys like put something together and you were like, you know, maybe we shouldn't go this far? Or was it kind of always like, okay, we're going to stay true to our vision no matter what, like just this kind of go all in kind of attitude?
So you're right. You know, that was a bit of a concern, as you know, when we started production 3.5 years ago, the world is actually quite different even than from then. We do represent a mature experience and a very dark humor, and I often talk about the, you know, things like Deadwood and things that we like and that inspire us. So we weren't going to back off from what we were going to do. But that said, there's always things we change that we back off from anyway. I tend to, I like when my writers, I say, it's okay to push it a little bit. Let us let us rein you back as opposed to the other way around. So there were absolutely things all the way to the end that I was like, that's got to go. That's just too much. We're not going to go there. One of the trickiest parts about this was that reality was kind of catching up to the world we created in many ways, and there was so many parallels that were right on the nose. You might notice in the game we give a disclaimer up front because we didn't want to give people the impression that we were purposely trying to lean in on some politics of today in order to generate sales or interest, because that's not what we were doing. This material was written years ago. And so, but we were starting to see the same things happen on the news, the same verbiage being used on the news. And it was like, ay, ay, ay. And so that's when we said, well, we don't want people to think we did this on purpose. So it's been an extra strange experience because of the nature of the world.
As someone who's never really played the Wasteland games growing up, I played a little bit of Wasteland 2. I felt that Wasteland 3 was very easier for me to get the hang of. It was very kind of new gamer friendly. Did you have any? Was that purposely? Did you try to make the game more approachable for new players who've never played in the Wasteland before?
That was definitely a focus of ours. Number one is we have our hardcore audience that really wants a certain kind of game in terms of a hardcore role-playing game and a tactical game, and we want that group to be happy for sure, no matter what. They're our top priority. But we always love to bring new people in, so we try to streamline the front end as much as we can, but without losing the depth and tactics that people want. And so it could be little things like, in this game, you could just start with a pair of pre-created characters and go. It's not a big deal, right? But in the last game, you got to create 6 people from scratch. Minute 1, you're a little overwhelmed, and so we tried to layer in the depth in a fairly short period of time, not so long that, again, we don't want to annoy the hardcore, because we like that group and they appreciate what we do. But there was an absolute focus that we wanted to open it up, and also that we never demand that you know anything about Wasteland 1 or Wasteland 2. It's not important. If you do, you appreciate more of the storylines that are going on, and there's lots of nods to the things that go back all the way to the 88 that people who played it will get a big smile on their face, but it's not required for somebody who wants to just jump in and go. That's the thing that's interesting for us about Game Pass. We'll have more people playing Wasteland 2 this weekend than 3 this weekend than Wasteland 2 did in a year. It'll be a tremendous amount of people, and a lot of them will be, I think, new to the category.
Yeah, I think Game Pass is a really great idea for Wasteland 3. I think if you ever had any excuse not to play the game before, like, that excuse is kind of gone, especially with Game Pass being available for $1 right now, I think, for new users. So there's obviously a lot of things that you guys did to expand on the Wasteland experience in Wasteland 3. So I guess kind of one of my biggest questions as I was playing through, and as I'm still playing through, because there's still plenty of content that I haven't explored yet, are there any big features that you wanted to add in Wasteland 3 that you guys just kind of didn't have the development time or power right now with the current technology to add?
Well, I think that there's so much in the game. Is there anything that we really wanted to get in that we couldn't? As usual, our designers, we tend to make games bigger than we thought they were going to be by the time we get to the end. I thought this game would be close to half of where it ended up being, and so it became much larger in scope. So we always find ourselves, yes, we love this scene, but we need to. We can't do it all. We have to be able to finish the game. So there was specific content that you can't do everything that you put on paper. But I don't know, feature wise, I think there's always more quality of life stuff we'd like to do. As creators, we're never done. This game, people are playing it from start to finish. They're enjoying it. It's not a problem. But with that said, we're not going to be done making it better. I mean, we're going to just keep taking feedback from our audience. Might be somebody would talk about prioritizing quick save in a different way on console. That's a good comment. We like that. There's sort of an infinite number of ways to look at these complex games, and so we can't see them from every angle. So we're always in our mind knowing we're going to keep honing it and make it better. But there's no one particular big thing that we weren't able to put in. I mean, it's a bit of the kitchen sink as it is.
Yeah, I mean, I've logged, I think, 45 hours at this point, getting up to where I am. So, I mean, I've seen a lot, experienced a lot, and haven't been disappointed with any of it. You guys have done a great job with it. So, I mean, I was just curious, if there was anything that didn't make it in with the kitchen sink,
Yeah, no, you're not even halfway through. So,
I
give you an idea.
I know. I'm so excited to dive back in, actually. So,
just to give you an idea of the scope, yeah, there's a lot to it. And I think that I like, I'm no spoilers, but there's whole sweeping changes to the world just based upon one decision you made or one particular NPC that's in your party that I think that people really love.
Can you talk about some of the challenges? Obviously, you're not new to console UI. You ported Wasteland 2 to the consoles, but like coming from a background of PC, where back in the day people couldn't even fathom, on the PlayStation days or the N64 days, putting an isometric RPG onto a console. What were some of the challenges when taking Wasteland 3 and porting it to Xbox One and PS4?
Well, as usual, it's always 100% UI based. You get the technology of getting it all on screen is not a problem. Our roots are PC, mouse and keyboard oriented, hotkeys, all that good stuff. But there's been a lot of great work done before us in terms of not just us, but what has XCOM done? How's Pillars of Eternity handled it? So we're very keenly aware of what others have done. We also Microsoft they have a user research lab, and that was we went in and out of there, I don't know, probably a dozen times, focused on just the UI for the controllers to make sure it felt good on console, because it's a very complex, oh my god, I got an entire party, I got to tactically lay them out, how can I do it in a way that isn't dragging things down? So I think we've continued to get better, and again, I think others have done a good job of sort of leading the way, but it's always UI based is the challenge.
I think that's kind of an excellent segue into my next question. So obviously, like when you guys released Wasteland 2, it was kind of a rebirth in a way of the isometric RPG experience. I mean, when you guys released Wasteland 2, we weren't seeing a whole lot of isometric RPG experiences, at least not on the scale that we have since then. So since that's come out, we've seen Divinity Original Sin 2, we've got Baldur's Gate 3 on the way, and obviously, like you mentioned, the Pillars of Eternity games. Do you think that this resurgent of isometric RPG experiences has kind of helped Wasteland 3 in the success that it's obviously seeing with reviews right now, and then we can only assume that it's going to see in the coming weekend and everything. And was there anything in those other games that kind of inspired you guys when you were making decisions in Wasteland 3?
Well, let's see. Well, so when we first started doing the Kickstarter in 2012, it was an experience that people wanted more of. There's a lot to be said. One of the things that the isometric role-playing games do a pretty good job with, or a great job, is the cause and effect. You're not it can be so asset driven that making these millions of combinations of permutations can be trickier when you're doing something, or you look at like Cyberpunk, look how long it takes to make a super immersive game that reacts in a really deep and meaningful way. Isometric's perfect for that. And so that gives us an opportunity to lean in on that. And that's what people wanted. I think of like with Wasteland 3, I've told people, like, I'm hoping it's like a reminder of what made people fall in love with the genre to begin with. As far as what we learn from others, I mean, with Divinity, we look, we already had multiplayer. I was actually when they came out with multiplayer, I was like, we already had that going, but they beat us to the punch. But they handled it a great way, and so we of course look at the way they handle those types of things. All of our writers and designers are fans of role-playing games, so they play Pillars of Eternity. We look at the writing style. We take things from everything. It could, like, for example, I think that we liked and we were already doing it, but I think it was a reaffirmation. The way Disco Elysium, the writing was tight. It didn't drag on too much. It's just enough kind of bite-sized chunks that it would fit your attention span. And they talked about recognition of Twitter and social media, because I think reading is very different. Let's say now versus the mid '90s, like Planescape tournament. People, you would read and read and read. Our people's attention spans are a little bit different now, and how they bring it in. So I think with Wasteland 3, we wanted to make sure it was a little punchier and to the point through its writing. And so and we'll play Final Fantasy 7 and look the way they handle UI devices. And we spend a lot of time just absorbing the marketplace and looking at what others are doing, so that we learn from all the best.
Can you guys talk about the design room experience, about when you're taking the narrative or a quest or something? You're like, oh, and then the player can do this, and then someone raises their hand and says, well, what if the player decides to kill him instead? And then you have to go completely another direction, and that it's basically like a node of just choices, right? And then you have to make sure that you have everything still available, or you change the story drastically based on the choices that you do if you decide to kill the people who are running the bazaar or not, that kind of stuff.
Right. Yeah. What happens if they kill the quest giver? And then I was like, okay, great. Now how do we handle it? And then and there were other things to sort of go the extra mile, where there was a scene where it was a critical story element scene, and they were talking about how this NPC that may or may not be in your party, what it meant to the world. And so they're talking. Well, I have the NPC in my party, and at first there wasn't a dialogue line. Like, you can't have the character talking about them and not have them go, hey, I'm right here. And so it was just a little thing like that it felt odd, let's say, for them to remain silent when this person's pontificating about the importance of this person in a role. And so sometimes it was just finding those moments and trying to cover as many as possible so that the world felt organic.
Yeah, I know it's been really fresh playing through and having the members of my party react to the things that are said about them or even their families. That's been really, really good about making the world, like you've said a lot in interviews, feel immersive and reactive to the choices that you've made. So obviously multiplayer was brought up, so I think it's a good time to kind of touch on this. It really adds a bit of extra chaos to the game. I mean, especially in the terms of the amount of freedom that you guys have given players. So how did you kind of...
I can vouch for that. Extra chaos is a great way to describe it.
Yeah. So how did you guys kind of work to make sure that it was balanced and fun for each player involved? And kind of, I guess, what was the challenge in giving more than one player the reins, so to speak?
Right. Well, let's see. So from a combat perspective, it always made a lot of sense. I mean, you're already controlling a group of people, so for you to handle 3 and I handle 3, pretty straightforward. So if we were in combat 100% of the time, that's a more straightforward way to do things. The problem is what happens if you're in a cinematic conversation and I'm in a combat? And so that's where things, as you say, the chaos ensues for what we describe, because the game already has a tremendous amount of edge cases, just period. And then you layer the multiplayer on top of it. So we spent, I don't know, we had 30 or 40 people geared up for a month just pounding on multiplayer alone because of those edge cases, because it's a narrative-driven storytelling game. And then whether is this a conversation the other person needs to see? Some they need to see and some they don't need to see. So that that would dictate how we handle certain situations. So we had to put a lot of hours into it. And look, multiplayer, I guarantee you somebody's going to go find a multiplayer issue, right? I mean, there's just it makes our head swim with it. But, it's really, it was the most requested feature that we had from people. I'm going to be playing it with a streamer tomorrow, and we played a little bit the other day and worked fine. We had a great time. And, I don't think there's enough games where you're playing with a friend. You're always trying to kill your friend, but there's not enough where you're able to do it together. So yeah, that was a probably feature wise, that was the biggest thing that we were bringing to the series, was that.
As someone who's played tabletop RPGs their whole lives, D&D, Mutants and Masterminds, Star Wars, whatever, Wasteland has deep roots in the tabletop RPG community and just in the genre in general. I have to say that each one of your dialogue options felt like you represented a player at a table. Like, every single time you had an important conversation, you had, like, the good guy. You had, like, the neutral asshole. You had the other guy who was the bad guy. And then, of course, you have, like, the guy, who wants to have sex with whatever you're talking to. Like, I feel like you hit every single point on the head with all the dialogue choices representing each person as much as you could at the table in a tabletop setting.
That's funny. Well, we know there are archetypes of people for sure, and so we do try to represent your kind of way of approaching the situation. I mean, as you know, sometimes it's funny. Like, I won't choose but just seeing that I could say that is enough to make me chuckle. And so. But sometimes you'll do it, save the game, and see the payoff. The other thing we did, we have the skill-based conversation system, which is, if you're a level 4 smartass, then you can say this thing. But we also made sure that it wasn't always something that would result in something positive, right? It shouldn't be that, oh, I have level 4, it must be a good thing. Well, no, maybe not. Maybe being a smartass in this situation is probably not a good thing, but hey, have at it, But and in all that, I always let people know that the world, that we try very hard to let the world react to your choices on how it would react, as opposed to us as designers morally deciding what we think is good or right. In fact, there's some very diverse endings for this game, and I think there'll be strong arguments on either side about what is a better ending. It's not black and white, and then there are other endings that are harder to pull off. They're maybe a little more clear, but all the way around, I think we love seeing people agonize over what is the right call here, or should I be doing this? I mean, that to me, that's the charm of role-playing games.
Yeah, and I think you guys captured that really well. I mean, like you said, especially a lot of the choices you come across in Wasteland 3 are not black and white. I mean, there's no good guy and bad guy. Like, I mean, everyone is kind of shitty, to be honest. Like, it's kind of got their their crappy parts and all. And I think that's something that's really good. And I think that having a level of freedom in Wasteland 3, like I said in my review, is almost unparalleled in any game out today. I mean, there are a lot of games that do reactivity to the player's choices well. Obviously, like some of the ones that we've talked about today during this interview. But I don't think that any really go the extra step like Wasteland does, at least in my opinion. So, I mean, in giving players kind of that freedom, did you ever run into any really huge challenges in when you were testing things? Like, was there anything that players broke and it was just kind of like, holy crap, how are we going to fix this so that so that players don't run into this once we ship the game?
Well, first, I'm glad that you recognize and appreciate all that we put into it, because sometimes we feel like we're in our own little hole doing it all, and we're like, I hope there's so much depth to it and complexity that people might only play it for 4 or 5 hours and think they have the gist, when there's so much more to it. So I'm appreciative and glad that you've gotten to get a sense of that. I think the biggest focus is to make sure we allow the player to do what naturally feels right in all these different situations. And so if you're ever watching a TV show, I'm very harsh on my shows that I watch, and there's some scene happens and you're like, why didn't that person say that? Like, why didn't they just tell them that I saw such and such? Like that, the whole scene wouldn't even make sense if that person had just spoken their mind with information that the viewer has. And so I find that like super aggravating when I watch TV shows when they're not behaving like real people. It ruins, it tears it down for me once they stop. You know, it's a little like in horror films when, you know, they like, really, you guys, you're going to split up and run into the forest? I mean, stop already. So in that same way, that was our focus here, to make sure that you could do the things that you wanted to do as much as we could. Right, we only have a finite amount of words and opportunities, but that we really made you feel like you were getting the choices that you wanted to make, and that there was a repercussion for it all. So that's the only best way I can really answer that question, is that was just a constant questioning, and it was I was on it all the time, and that's part of. I mean, I have different roles, and as do my writers and everybody else, but just to keep, you know, that doesn't feel right, that doesn't sound right. Why can't I say that? You know, there was one part at the end where you had already kind of telegraphed what you were going to do in the game several times, and then you appeared to have a third time to change your mind, but you really didn't. And so I'm like, no, that's a false choice. Remove it. That's irritating. We've done such a wonderful job. So to try to, you know, and it's not that every choice has to have some huge thing, but this particular one felt like a really annoying false choice. So I had them pull that. So, I mean, it's really the sensibilities of it in that wheelhouse that we spend our time.
I was dying at the Reagan robot. Where did that idea come from, and why was it executed so damn well?
So the Gippers were going to be in Wasteland 2. And that was a cult that didn't make the final one. And I said, it's absolutely going to make the third one. So that's one way or the other. And so, I mean, the basic premise when we moved to Colorado also was that, you know, one, that NORAD was there. So, you know, there's a reason. But this whole concept that the doomsday preppers that, you know, that people make fun of now, they were right, okay? And now they're in charge. And they tend to be, you know, very sort of, you know, American-driven patriots, really. And so we thought that, you know, anything patriotic sounding and feeling was something that felt right for Wasteland 3, and who more than Ronald Reagan? I mean, he is a cult figure in himself, and you'll recognize we're not making fun of Ronald Reagan, right? We are, this cult is believing that he was a god, as do some people in real life, and so we thought, let's dial it to a 10 and go all the way. So the world helped us design the Gippers.
My final question ended out. We've been asking a lot of serious questions, so I kind of want to take one off the rails to kind of end things out. Is it bad if I have 10 levels in toaster repair?
No, you're level 10? Well, it's a little early in the game to have level 10 toaster repair. However, there is a big bonus for you if you find all the toasters. Okay,
I've been looking for the toaster. I'm not quite to level 10 yet, but I just want to make sure I'm not making a bad decision.
No. You get something very special that you will fully appreciate.
I'm so glad I've been wasting those skill points.
No, yeah, they are not a waste. You will have more fun than many.
Fantastic.
So like Wasteland 3 comes out this week, very soon, on Xbox Game Pass and on PC, and you guys should pick it up because the game is absolutely incredible. There's no other game where you can have a robot sex orgy, I'll put it that way.
I hope we're the only one. I mean, it's a bullet. I think it's a bullet point on the back of the box.
That's your box art on the back, right? I had sex in a robot orgy, and then just, you know.
That's our ad copy right there.